AITA for threatening to call the police against my MIL after she took my kids without permission. I 34 female have had a pretty rocky relationship with my mother-in-law 60 female for as long as I can remember. It's not like I went into the relationship with my husband 37 male looking for drama or conflict, I mean, who does? But from the moment I became part of her son's life, it seemed like she was always looking for a way to subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, assert her dominance. The kind of woman who believes that no one will ever be good enough for her son, you know. For years, I tried to keep the peace. I smiled through her passive-aggressive comments about how I didn't cook like her, or how her house was always spotless when she was raising kids. I let her offer unsolicited parenting advice, even when it was outdated or outright wrong. I even let it slide when she referred to our daughter as her baby, as if I didn't exist. I was raised to respect elders, and while I didn't exactly like her, I was determined to at least keep things civil for the sake of family harmony. Things got a lot more complicated after her divorce a few years ago. She had been married to my father-in-law for over 3 decades, and while it wasn't a shocking split, honestly, anyone who spent 5 minutes with them could tell they were miserable together. It still shook her entire world. This was a woman who had built her entire identity around being a wife and mother, and suddenly, that foundation crumbled beneath her. She moved into a smaller house closer to town, started experimenting with younger, trendier clothes, and before long, she jumped headfirst into the dating scene. At first, I was supportive. Everyone deserves to find happiness, right? If this was her way of reclaiming her life and rediscovering herself, who was I to judge? But the way she went about it was, well, chaotic is probably the nicest way to put it. She was dating a lot. And when I say a lot, I mean there was a revolving door of boyfriends coming in and out of her life. Some of them stuck around for a few months, but most didn't last long enough for anyone to learn their last names. There were a few instances where I couldn't even keep track of which guy she was talking about because she'd moved on to someone new before I'd even had a chance to meet the previous one. That's fine, she's a grown woman, and she's entitled to her personal life. But it started to become a concern for me when she began pushing, harder and harder, for our kids 7 female and 10 male to spend time at her house. At first, her requests were harmless enough, framed as innocent comments sprinkled into conversation. You should let the kids stay with me for a weekend, they'd love it. Or, it's been so long since I had little ones running around the house. I miss them. She said it in this wistful, almost pleading tone that made me feel bad for saying no, but I shrugged it off as typical grandma behavior. Over time, though, those subtle hints turned into something much more insistent. She started guilt-tripping us, pulling out lines like, I'm their grandmother, don't I deserve time with them? Don't you think it's important for them to have memories with me? She'd direct her complaints at my husband, too, implying that I was the one blocking her from seeing the kids. Your wife's too overprotective, she'd say to him, as if I wasn't standing right there. I don't see why she's so controlling about this. It stung because it wasn't true. I wasn't trying to keep her away from them. In fact, I'd always encouraged her to come over or suggested meeting up somewhere fun, like a park or a kid-friendly restaurant. She was welcome to spend all the time she wanted with them, just not at her house. That's because her house wasn't just her house. It came with an unpredictable cast of boyfriends, most of whom were strangers to us. I didn't feel comfortable exposing my kids to that, especially when there was no telling who might be around on any given day. It became even more concerning after my son mentioned, completely out of the blue, that he felt weird around one of her boyfriends. He didn't elaborate much, just said the man talked funny, and made him feel uncomfortable. That one comment was enough for me to draw a hard line. I don't care if it's my mother-in-law, a close friend, or a total stranger. If my child feels uneasy around someone, that's all the reason I need to take a step back. My husband agreed, although I could tell he struggled with how to communicate this to his mom without creating more drama. He loves his mom, and while he recognizes her flaws, he always tries to give her the benefit of the doubt. I knew it wasn't easy for him, but he backed me up when I told him we needed to set some clear boundaries. The rule was simple: she could see the kids whenever she wanted, but it had to be at our house or somewhere public. Under no circumstances would they be spending time at her place. When we laid it out for her, she didn't take it well. She acted like we were punishing her, like this was some personal attack on her lifestyle. She didn't yell or argue outright, but she let her displeasure be known through her usual passive-aggressive comments. "I guess I'm just not trusted anymore," she'd sigh dramatically. Or, "It's sad when you can't even feel comfortable in your own family." It was exhausting, but we stood firm. My husband and I both knew this wasn't about control or judgment, it was about protecting our kids and ensuring they felt safe. And honestly, if she couldn't understand that, it was her problem, not ours. This past weekend, though, things came to a head in a way I never expected. She called us on Saturday morning, completely out of the blue, and offered to come over and watch the kids while my husband and I ran some errands. It caught me off guard because it wasn't her usual style. Typically, when she wanted to spend time with the kids, it came with strings attached or some not-so-subtle push to have them at her house. But this? Volunteering to come to our home and help out? It felt uncharacteristically selfless for her. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if there was some ulterior motive I wasn't seeing, but then I thought, maybe this is her way of extending an olive branch. Maybe she was trying to meet us halfway after all the tension over the past few months. My husband seemed equally surprised but shrugged and said, "Why not? After all, it would make our errands a lot easier if we didn't have to juggle the kids." She arrived about an hour later, and to my surprise, she was in a cheerful mood, almost too cheerful. She was all smiles, chatting with the kids like she didn't have a care in the world. Even her tone with me was oddly warm, and I found myself relaxing just a little. Maybe I've been too hard on her, I thought. Maybe she's genuinely trying to make an effort. I told her what time we'd be back and reminded her that the kids had some snacks in the kitchen if they got hungry. She nodded enthusiastically, waved us off, and said something like, "Go have fun. The kids and I are going to have a great time." Everything seemed fine. The kids were happy, she seemed cooperative, and for once, there wasn't any tension in the air. My husband and I left, trusting that things would go as planned. But when we got home a few hours later, something immediately felt off. The house was too quiet. Too still. No laughter, no toys scattered around, no half-eaten bowls of snacks left on the coffee table, nothing. I walked through the living room, calling out for the kids, but there was no answer. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. I checked the backyard, thinking maybe they'd gone out to play, but it was empty. My husband looked just as confused as I felt, and I could see the worry starting to creep into his expression. That's when it hit me, they weren't here. Neither were their shoes or jackets by the door. I grabbed my phone and immediately called her, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was racing. She picked up on the second ring, her tone completely casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Oh, we're at my house," she said, like this was the most natural thing in the world. My jaw dropped. "The kids missed me," she added, her voice practically dripping with innocence, "and I thought it'd be nice for them to stay the night." It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I was furious, beyond furious. This was not what we had agreed to, and she knew it. We had been so clear about our boundaries, and she had blatantly ignored them. My husband, ever the peacekeeper, tried to calm me down. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She probably didn't realize." I cut him off mid-sentence. "She knew exactly what she was doing," I snapped. There was no misunderstanding here. She had gone behind our backs and done precisely what we'd told her not to do. I reminded him, probably a little too loudly, why we don't let the kids stay at her house, especially given her revolving door of boyfriends. That wasn't a boundary we'd set lightly, it was about protecting our kids. Period. My husband sighed and, after a moment's hesitation, picked up his phone to call her. He asked, as diplomatically as he could, if her boyfriend was there. She swore up and down that he wasn't. "It's just me and the kids," she insisted, her tone light and dismissive, as though the very question was ridiculous. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It was too smooth, too rehearsed. My gut was screaming at me that something wasn't adding up. I told my husband I wanted to go get the kids immediately. He hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to trust his mother and knowing I wasn't going to back down. "Do you really think she'd lie to us about something like that?" he asked, his voice almost pleading. But I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. I told him, firmly, that I wasn't willing to take any chances. There was no way I was going to let this slide, not when our kids were involved. So we drove over to her place. The entire ride there, my mind was racing. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I tried to keep my temper in check. My husband kept glancing over at me, clearly torn between wanting to say something to calm me down and knowing better than to try. I didn't need calming down. I needed answers. My gut was already telling me what we'd find when we got there, but a part of me still hoped I was wrong, that maybe, just maybe, she had actually respected our boundaries for once. As we turned the corner onto her street, though, that hope vanished. Sitting there in her driveway, as bold as day, was her boyfriend's car. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, hot and sharp like a volcano ready to erupt. I parked the car a little too abruptly, the tires crunching against the gravel. My husband opened his door slowly, hesitating as he looked at me. "Are you sure you don't want me to handle this?" he asked, his voice cautious. I didn't even glance at him. "No," I said firmly. "I'll handle it." I didn't trust myself not to scream if he tried to downplay the situation or sugarcoat things, and I wasn't about to let her wiggle her way out of this with her usual excuses. Not this time. I marched up to the door, my husband trailing behind me, and knocked harder than I probably needed to. The sound echoed in the quiet neighborhood, but I didn't care. My heart was pounding in my chest, not from nerves, but from sheer, unfiltered rage. After what felt like an eternity, the door swung open, and there she was, standing there with a surprised look plastered across her face, as if she hadn't expected us to show up. It was almost comical how caught off guard she looked, like a kid who'd been caught sneaking cookies from the jar. "We just decided we wanted to have dinner with the kids tonight," I said, forcing a polite tone that felt like it could crack under the weight of my anger at any second. "So we're going to take them home." Her expression immediately changed. The surprise melted into something else, annoyance, maybe, or defiance. "What's the problem?" she demanded, crossing her arms over her chest like a teenager being scolded. "They're happy here. Why can't you just let them stay?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I could feel my husband shift uncomfortably beside me, but I wasn't backing down. "We've already talked about this," I said as calmly as I could manage. "You know why we don't let the kids stay here, and you know this wasn't what we agreed to when we left them with you." She rolled her eyes dramatically, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice rising. "You're judging me because I have a boyfriend, aren't you? You're trying to control my life." There it was, the same tired argument she always fell back on, the same deflection she used whenever she didn't want to take responsibility for her actions. That's when I snapped. I could feel the words bubbling up in my chest, sharp and cutting, and I didn't hold them back. "This isn't about your boyfriend," I said, my voice firm and unyielding. "This is about you crossing a major line. You took our kids without our permission, after we specifically told you we weren't comfortable with them being here. You ignored everything we've said, everything we've asked of you, because you think you know better. Well, guess what? You don't." Her face twisted into a mix of anger and hurt, and she started yelling back, her voice trembling. "You're being cruel," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're punishing me for trying to have a life. Is that what you want? For me to just sit at home alone forever while you treat me like some kind of criminal? I didn't flinch. I didn't budge. No, I said, my voice steady. What I want is for you to respect our boundaries and stop putting your wants ahead of what's best for our kids. If you ever do something like this again, if you ever take them without our permission, I will call the police. Do you understand me? The words hung in the air, heavy and final. She started crying in earnest then, her voice breaking as she accused me of being heartless and unfair. But I wasn't moved. I wasn't going to let her tears manipulate me this time. I turned to the kids, who had come to the door at some point during the argument, their faces uncertain. Come on, guys, I said gently. We're going home. I packed them into the car while she stood there on the porch, still yelling and crying, her face flushed with frustration. On the drive home, my husband was quiet. After we got the kids settled, he told me he agreed that what she did was wrong, but he thought I shouldn't have yelled or threatened her. He said it just escalated things unnecessarily and made her feel attacked. I told him I didn't feel bad about it at all. She crossed a huge line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Someone had to stand up to her, and if that someone had to be me, so be it. Now I'm wondering if I overreacted. My husband keeps saying I was too harsh, but I honestly don't see how else I could have handled it. She disregarded our boundaries and put my kids in a situation I wasn't comfortable with. I feel like I had every right to be angry. So, Reddit, AITA. Update. A few days after the fiasco at my mother-in-law's house, my husband and I were still reeling from what had happened. The tension in the house was thick, and every time I thought about her blatant disregard for our boundaries, I felt the anger bubbling up all over again. My husband and I had talked about it at length, me more angrily than him, of course, and he had reassured me that we'd handled it the best way we could. Still, the whole ordeal left me on edge, and I found myself double-checking the locks on our doors at night and keeping my phone within arm's reach just in case she tried to pull something else. That week, my husband and I had to take care of some business that required both of us to leave the house for a few hours. Normally, we'd have planned ahead and arranged for someone to stay with the kids, but it was a last-minute thing, and we figured it wasn't a big deal. Our son is 10, our daughter is 7, and they're both mature for their ages. Plus, we weren't going to be gone for long, just a couple of hours, max. We made sure they had everything they needed, told them not to open the door for anyone, and reminded them to call us if they needed anything. They've stayed home alone for short periods before, and it's always been fine. I wasn't worried. By the time we finished running our errands and were heading back, I was already looking forward to getting home and relaxing. But as we turned onto our street, I saw something that made my stomach drop, a familiar car parked in front of our house. My heart started racing as I recognized it. It was my mother-in-law's car. And right behind it, unmistakable as ever, was her boyfriend's car. My husband and I exchanged a look, and I could see the same dread in his eyes that I felt in my chest. We parked in the driveway, and I practically jumped out of the car, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I approached the house, I could see through the front window that there was movement inside. My mother-in-law was there, and it looked like she was gathering things. My steps quickened, and when I opened the front door, the sight before me made my blood boil. There she was, standing in the middle of my living room with her arms full of the kids' backpacks and jackets. My kids were standing nearby, looking confused but not scared, and her boyfriend, this man I barely knew and had explicitly said I didn't want around my children, was leaning casually against the wall, watching the scene unfold like he had every right to be there. My house felt like it had been invaded. I felt a wave of anger, disbelief, and betrayal wash over me all at once. I demanded to know what she was doing there, my voice trembling with barely contained anger, and her response absolutely floored me. She didn't seem the least bit apologetic or even remotely aware of how outrageous her actions were. With the most nonchalant tone, like this was the most reasonable explanation in the world, she said that she had called the house earlier to check in on the kids. When they told her that my husband and I were out running errands, she apparently decided, unilaterally, that it was unacceptable for them to be home alone. And so, without a single text or phone call to either of us, without even stopping to consider that we might have had a perfectly reasonable plan for leaving the kids on their own, she had taken it upon herself to drive over, walk into our house, and rescue them. Her explanation made it sound like she thought she was some kind of hero, swooping in to save the day. It was infuriating how she framed it, like she expected me to thank her for what she'd done. And the kicker? She wasn't just there to check on them or keep them company until we got home. Oh no. She had been in the middle of packing up their things when we arrived, fully intending to take them back to her house without our knowledge or consent. She said this like it was a foregone conclusion, like she was doing us some kind of favor. There wasn't a shred of acknowledgement that what she was doing was wrong. She seemed to think she was entirely justified in her actions. I could barely process what I was hearing. Her tone, her attitude, the casualness of it all, it was like she didn't even see how grossly she had overstepped. She stood there, holding my kids' backpacks and jackets, acting like she had some moral obligation to step in and override the decisions we had made as their parents. She didn't even bother to try denying that her boyfriend was there. She didn't even seem embarrassed about bringing him along, despite the fact that we had explicitly and repeatedly told her we were not comfortable with him being around our kids. She brushed it off as though it was a minor detail, as though his presence was irrelevant. But what really pushed me over the edge, what truly made my blood boil, was when my daughter, with her sweet and innocent voice, chimed in to explain what had happened. She looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes, completely unaware of how much her words would enrage me. "Grandma said you said it was fine for us to go with her," she said matter-of-factly, as if that cleared up the whole situation. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. My mother-in-law had lied to them, flat out lied, and told my kids that I had given her permission to take them. It was such a brazen, manipulative move that I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. She had exploited their innocence, their trust in her as their grandmother, to manipulate them into going along with her plan. And my kids, of course, had no reason to doubt her. To them, she was grandma, someone they loved and trusted. Why would they think she'd lie to them? It was horrifying to think about how easily she had weaponized that trust, using it to circumvent the rules and boundaries we had so clearly set as their parents. I could feel my hands shaking as the reality of the situation sunk in. She had entered my home without permission, brought along her boyfriend, someone my kids were visibly uncomfortable around, and was in the process of trying to take them out of my house under the guise of doing me a favor. All of this without so much as a phone call to me or my husband. It was the ultimate betrayal, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I told her, firmly and without hesitation, that she needed to leave immediately. She started making excuses, trying to explain herself, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. She claimed she was just looking out for the kids, that she didn't think it was safe for them to be home alone, and that she thought she was doing the right thing. But I wasn't buying it. I'd heard enough of her justifications to know when she was trying to weasel her way out of trouble. I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of this. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and started dialing. The sight of me actually calling the police must have shaken her because her demeanor changed instantly. Her excuses turned into frantic apologies, and she started begging me not to go through with it. She kept saying it was a misunderstanding, that she didn't mean any harm, but I didn't care. She had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. She had violated our trust in a way that I couldn't overlook. Her boyfriend, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke up, urging her to leave. He must have sensed that I wasn't bluffing because he grabbed her arm and practically dragged her toward the door. She kept glancing back at me, still pleading, but I didn't waver. I stood there, phone in hand, watching as they finally left the house and got into their cars. The moment they drove off, I locked the door behind them and let out a shaky breath. My husband, who had been standing silently by the whole time, looked as stunned as I felt. The kids, thankfully, seemed more confused than upset. They didn't fully understand what had just happened, and for that, I was grateful. But for me, this was the final straw. My mother-in-law had not only disregarded our boundaries again, but she had actively lied to my children and tried to take them without our permission. It was a level of disrespect I never could have anticipated.